welcome to my very first tutorial. I had a message come through on my Eggbox Studios Instagram account asking me how I like my scenes. So I'm going to quickly go through quite a basic tutorial. It's non-software specific, but I will be using Lightwave for this, which has been my main software choice for, I don't know, nearly 20 years. It's going to go right back to the very basics of it, because I think there's a lot of reliance on radiosity, global illumination, HDR backdrops and things like that to light scenes, which is fine, and in some cases they work great and other times not so much. But I'm just going to be doing a simple product render, just as an example of how I would light that sort of scene. Let me just open up what we've got here. So everything's blown out. This is kind of like a default scene. It's if I go into the render settings, and it's got global illumination turned on. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn that off. I don't need that. I may turn it on later, but I'm not going to rely on that for lighting the scene. And obviously it'll make the previews much quicker. For the backdrop as well, I'm going to turn that off. It comes with this default gradient backdrop, which I think a lot of other 3D software do that as well. A lot of renderers do that. Great for exterior architectural scenes, but for this, turning it off, I just want it black. And I'm also going to turn off, or rather get rid of this default light. I don't want it. There needs to be one light in the scene, so I'm going to change this light. I'll change it to an area light, and for now that's it. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to work with this one light. I've got quite a few different views here which may get confusing, but I'll try and talk you through what's going on. So let's move this light somewhere a little bit more appropriate. Over this side. So basically, I'm trying to think like a photographer. I want to remove as much light as possible from the scene. I don't want anything to interfere with this scene, which is why I've turned the backdrop black. I've got this product here, this simple product. As I put the light there, it actually looks quite nice like that already. But yeah, basically, I don't want anything else to interfere with it, which is why I'm not going to use an HDR backdrop. I think that some of the studio backdrop HDRs are great, but you're stuck with that particular lighting. You can't modify it and change it. And if you're doing product renders, you want to be able to kind of sculpt the scene as such. You want to be picking out highlights, you want to be picking out curves, picking out the shapes of that object, which is why I go back to this standard kind of photography setup of having a black backdrop. I've got this studio environment that I've created, just a really simple infinite curve, and then I use area lights. I don't know about all 3D software where they're at with using various lights. Prior to recent versions of Lightwave, it had a different material system. It didn't have physically based materials, and the lights didn't show up in reflections, or they did, but they weren't like luminous panels, which they are now. So I would use lights. I'd use area lights, and also I'd have panels that I'd increase the luminosity on, and I'd use those luminous panels to basically reflect off the object, and that's what I'm using to create this shape. So here we've got our panels. I'm basically going to use like a 3 light setup. So for those that aren't familiar with standard sort of 3 light setups, which would be used in photography generally, you'd have a key light, which we'll use this as the key light. Let's change this to key just to make it easier. And this is going to give us our main kind of light source, main reflections, and that's going to give us our highlight. So here we've got that nice sharp highlight going down that side there. That looks alright for the minute. I think we might keep that. Let's just move that around a touch. Maybe make it slightly bigger. Yeah, I like that. It's picking up this this black area down here, and it's giving us this nice highlight which sort of outlines the shape of the object there. So I like that. We'll keep that. I'm going to duplicate this light, and I'm going to move another one around this side. Now this is going to be our fill light. Generally the fill light will be let's change this to fill. Will be a sort of half the strength of the key light. It's not always that. Sometimes it's the same, you know, sometimes it can even be brighter depending on where it is. But it's filling in the shadows that are left by the other light. So we sort of move this away. It's quite dark on this side. So we're going to use this to just pull in some of that light on the other side. And also we're getting this nice sort of secondary reflection. What I want to do is pull it right around the back of the object. Let's change this to a solid view so you can get a better idea of what's going on. I'm going to pull that in. Yeah, that's looking quite nice. I like that. It's also this handle here as well. It's brought that out. This is just an old object, by the way. It's an old product object that was created, and yeah, I've just pulled that in as an example. So yeah, I mean, that on its own is looking quite nice. We could kind of more or less go with that. I think what I'm going to do is just change this backdrop to something a bit more interesting. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, on its own, I quite like that. We've got the key and we've got the fill. We've got this studio object which I think, yeah, we'll just pull that back. What I've done, I mean, because we'll probably crop in on this object anyway, I haven't worried about the backdrop being the full width. But as I was talking about earlier, where we want to keep the keep everything dark and then sculpt with the light, I would generally make that smaller. It's not making a lot of difference on this, to be honest, but it will then give you darker areas, like between the highlights. What you do in a photo studio is use black boards to fill in those gaps. So if you've got these highlights but there's too much light coming through, say on this center section, you would put a black board in the way to block the light to that area. But obviously, I mean, it'd be difficult because the camera's in the way, but obviously we don't need to do that because we can create an infinite black space just by having a black backdrop. So let's, what I have noticed is as we move this forward, I don't know if you can see where the mouse cursor is, but this bottom section of the object, there's no light on there at all. It's being blocked off by the studio backdrop. So I'm going to draw that back. You can see that it's now starting to appear. Now we may be able to get away with that. Sort of in post we could extend out the floor a little bit, or we can try lifting this up a little bit, maybe dropping it down a little I mean, this is where it comes into you're literally painting with the light. You're just moving things around. What we can also do is we can paint this in post if we need to. Don't worry about, you know, getting everything done in the render, because it's not always going to work out like that. Okay, so this other light, let's duplicate that. Let's call this one rim. And yeah, try and avoid some jokes about doing a rim job. Okay, so this light would generally go behind the object, but we're not necessarily going to do that. It doesn't really need it. I mean, it's getting some nice little highlights on there actually, so it could work quite well. We can play with that. What I'm actually going to do with this though is I'm going to lift it up and put it slightly above. I may actually put it flat and then bring it forward. How much effect is that having? Not a lot, is it? Not doing a lot. I think what I might do is spin it around and put it over here at the back. That's nice. Okay. So you can see why this is called a rim light. It's to pick up the very edges of the object. Now generally you would use something like this if it was if you're doing a person, for example, and you wanted to highlight their hair. You'd use a rim light for doing that. Yeah, that's doing something. Right, so I'm going to go through key light, I'm going to turn off the diffuse. Fill light, I'm going to turn off the diffuse. And the rim light, I'm going to turn off the diffuse. And here we can see the basic shape of that object. And this is another thing that I will often do, is I just want to see the reflections. I want to see those highlights and where they're working and where they're not. Go back to that key light. I'm going to bring it out a little bit. Now we've got the rim light in there. Maybe bring that around a little bit. See, that's quite nice. That's looking quite nice. It's got these stripes. It's yeah, I like that. I think this could maybe go up a touch. Yeah. So turn the diffuse back on for all of those. Now I'd say the only thing is that everything's overly bright. I think the rim light may be okay. I think the key and the fill light are too much. I'd much rather increase the brightness in post than do it all in here. We could go up a bit more maybe. What you'll find as well is that, I mean, it may be slightly different in different applications, but as the light gets bigger, the intensity actually decreases. I always think of it as just the light being spread over a larger area. Yeah, I think they'll do. It's not the most interesting subject, but yeah, hopefully it'll give you a quick idea of how to do these setups and why you would do them. It gives you much more flexibility than just using an HDR map on the backdrop. Cool. Thanks for watching.